There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that hinge on a single sentence whispered in a concrete echo chamber, a space designed for transit and nothing more. They are the interstitial spaces, the hallways and stairwells between the rooms where life is supposed to happen. You don't expect them to become the rooms themselves, the containers for the memories that will ultimately define you. But memory is a strange architect. It builds monuments in the most unremarkable of places. For me, it built one in the cold, gray stairwell of our apartment building, a place that smelled of dust and rain-dampened concrete. It was a place with no cameras, a fact I had never considered until the moment he said it. His voice a low tremor that seemed to vibrate right through the steel of the handrail and into my bones. That moment became the threshold, the door I had been standing in front of for years, waiting, without ever realizing I was waiting for it, to finally be opened. He pressed me to the rail, and the world narrowed to the rough texture of the painted metal against my back and the impossible, overwhelming proximity of him. It wasn't a shove, not an act of aggression. It was a gravitational pull, a final, desperate closing of a distance that had felt both infinitesimally small and tragically vast for as long as I could remember. It was the end of a long, silent conversation and the beginning of a terrifyingly audible one. And in that quiet, unobserved space, under the hum of a single fluorescent bulb, everything I had carefully built, all the walls of my quiet observance, came down. I had known Liam for 4 years, since the first week of university when we were assigned as random roommates in a dorm that was perpetually damp and smelled of cheap pizza and anxiety. He arrived like a summer storm, all bright energy and easy laughter, his duffel bags emblazoned with the swim team logo dropping to the floor with a thud that seemed to announce his presence to the entire building. He was built like a swimmer, all broad shoulders and long limbs, a body designed for cleaving through water, for propulsion and speed. His hair was perpetually damp, smelling of chlorine even when he'd just woken up, and his skin carried the faint, clean scent of it, a chemical tang that I would come to associate with safety, with home. He moved with a thoughtless grace, an economy of motion that was beautiful to watch, whether he was navigating our cramped room or slicing through the turquoise water of the university pool. He was an architecture of sunlight and motion, and I, from the very beginning, was the quiet, shadowed corner of the room, observing. I was a photographer. It was more than a hobby, more than a planned career. It was the way I processed the world. I lived my life through a viewfinder, finding solace in the act of framing things, of isolating a single, perfect moment from the chaotic mess of reality. It gave me a purpose for my quietness, a justification for my tendency to stand at the edge of things, watching. People mistook my silence for shyness, sometimes for arrogance, but it was neither. It was a state of absorption. I was busy collecting light, cataloging the way a shadow fell across a face, the fleeting micro-expression that betrayed a thought, the poetry in the mundane. My camera was a shield and a bridge all at once. It allowed me to be close to people without having to fully participate in the noisy, often confusing performance of social interaction. It allowed me to love things from a safe distance. And I loved Liam from a safe distance. It began almost immediately, a low, quiet hum beneath the surface of our burgeoning friendship. In those first few weeks, I took hundreds of photos of him, most without him even knowing. It wasn't predatory, it was reverent. I captured the way the morning light caught the blonde tips of his hair as he sat hunched over a textbook, his brow furrowed in concentration. I documented the exhaustion etched on his face after a grueling practice, the relaxed line of his shoulders as he laughed at something on his phone, the constellation of freckles across his nose that only appeared in the summer. My hard drive became a secret archive of him, a testament to the silent, one-sided conversation I was having with his existence. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever tried to frame, and the most frustrating, because a still image could never capture the fluid energy that was so essentially him. It was like trying to photograph the wind. Our friendship solidified into something deep and essential with a surprising ease. He seemed to understand my need for silence, my tendency to retreat into my own head. He never pushed me to be more outgoing, more like him. Instead, he would simply create a space for me in his whirlwind life. He'd come back from a party and, instead of heading to bed, would sit on the edge of my mattress and tell me about it in a low voice, as if sharing a secret, describing the people and the music until I felt like I had been there myself. When I was lost in editing photos, forgetting to eat, he would appear with a sandwich or a bowl of cereal, placing it beside my keyboard without a word, a silent, nourishing presence. We were a study in contrasts, the swimmer and the photographer, the man of action and the man of observation, yet we fit together in a way that defied logic. We were two halves of a strange, unspoken whole. He was the motion, and I was the stillness that gave it shape. The unspoken part, of course, was the chasm of my feelings for him. It was a constant, aching presence inside my chest, a truth I walled off and guarded with the same meticulous care I used to protect my camera lenses. He was effortlessly, devastatingly straight. He had a girlfriend, Sarah, for the first 2 years we knew each other. She was nice enough, a bubbly, kind girl from his economics class who never seemed to understand the quiet language Liam and I shared. When she was around, Liam was different, a slightly brighter, more performative version of himself. I would watch them together, my camera safely in its bag, and feel a cold, hollow ache. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was a profound sense of misinterpretation. It felt like watching someone read my favorite book aloud, but get all the emphasis wrong, missing the subtle beauty of the prose. I never wished her ill. I just wished, with a desperate, secret hope, that he could find with her the same quiet understanding he found with me. He never did. After they broke up, there were others, a string of casual dates and short-lived flings. Liam navigated the world of romance with a kind of bewildered optimism, always hoping for a grand connection, but seemingly settling for pleasant distractions. He would tell me about his dates, dissecting conversations, and worrying over text messages, and I would listen, offering neutral, supportive advice, my own heart a silent, heavy stone in my chest. I became his confidant, his safe harbor, the one constant in his emotionally turbulent life. And I accepted the role because it was the only one offered, the only way I could keep him close. To risk that friendship, to shatter that trust by confessing the truth of my feelings, felt like an act of self-destruction. It would be like exposing my most precious, undeveloped film to the harsh, bleaching sun. The image would be ruined, turned to nothing but white noise. So I kept my silence. I kept my distance, even when we were sitting shoulder to shoulder on our worn-out couch. I learned to live in the space between us, a space filled with everything I could never say. When we graduated, the thought of not living together was so unbearable that we didn't even discuss it as a possibility. We just found an apartment, a small 2-bedroom place with thin walls and a decent view of the city's skyline if you craned your neck just right. He got a job as a consultant at a software firm, a role that required him to be the charming, energetic person he was, but it also drained him in a way swimming never had. He still swam, waking up at ungodly hours to train with a master's team, chasing the ghost of his collegiate glory. I found work as a freelance photographer, shooting weddings, portraits, product catalogs, anything to pay the bills while I worked on my personal projects, the quiet, moody street photography that was my real passion. Our lives settled into a new rhythm, a domesticity that was both comforting and excruciating. We shared bills, groceries, and the remote control. We built a life together, a partnership in every sense but the one I craved most. And the silence inside me grew louder, the unspoken things filling every room of our small apartment until I felt like I was suffocating on them. The shift began on a Tuesday in October. It was a day of relentless, miserable rain, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes the whole world feel gray and weary. Liam had been under a tremendous amount of pressure at work, leading a project that was, in his words, a total dumpster fire. He had been working late for weeks, coming home long after I'd eaten, his usual bright energy dimmed to a low, flickering ember. He looked tired, worn thin, the vibrant colors of his personality washed out. That night, he came home later than ever, dripping wet, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't even turn on the light. He just dropped his briefcase by the door and stood there in the darkness of the entryway, the sound of his ragged breathing the only thing cutting through the drumming of the rain against the window panes. I was on the couch, editing a set of wedding photos, the manufactured joy of the images a stark contrast to the gloom of the evening. I looked up, my eyes adjusted to the dim light from my laptop screen. "Hey," I said softly. "You okay?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, a quiet, broken sound. They pulled the plug. The whole project. Months of work, just gone. My heart ached for him. I closed my laptop, the sudden darkness making the room feel more intimate. "Liam, I'm so sorry. Come here." I patted the cushion next to me, an invitation I'd given 1,000 times. But this time was different. He didn't just sit next to me. He collapsed. He folded himself onto the couch, his head landing in my lap with a weary thud, his long body curled up as tightly as it could go. It was a movement of pure, unthinking instinct, a creature seeking warmth and shelter from a storm. My entire body went rigid. In 4 years of friendship, of sharing rooms and apartments, of casual hugs and slaps on the back, he had never done this. This was a new territory, a crossing of a boundary I had so carefully patrolled. My hand hovered in the air above his head, uncertain. My mind was screaming. What do I do? Do I touch him? Do I pull away? He was radiating a misery so profound it felt like a physical force. My own desires felt selfish and predatory in the face of his raw pain. But then he shivered, a deep, rattling tremor that ran through his whole body, and my instincts took over. I slowly, tentatively, lowered my hand and rested it on his damp hair. It was soft, silky. I began to stroke it, my fingers moving in a slow, rhythmic pattern, the way you would comfort a frightened animal or a child. He sighed, a long, shuddering exhalation that seemed to carry all the stress of the past few months with it, and melted further into my lap, his body going slack with trust. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The rain lashed against the windows, the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks on the glass, and I just sat there, my hand in his hair, my heart a frantic, terrified bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Every rational thought told me this meant nothing, that it was just a moment of desperation, a friend seeking comfort from another friend. But the irrational, hopeful part of me, the part one had tried so hard to starve into silence, was feasting on this moment. It was analyzing the weight of his head on my thighs, the warmth of his breath through the fabric of my jeans, the absolute, unguarded vulnerability of his posture. He had sought me out. In his moment of defeat, he had come to me for refuge. It felt like a tectonic shift, a deep and fundamental change in the landscape of our friendship. I was his anchor in the storm, and I was terrified that when the storm passed, he would realize how dangerously close to the rocks I had let him drift. That night was the beginning of the ritual. It didn't happen every day, but it became a new, unspoken part of our dynamic. Whenever the pressures of his job became too much, whenever the relentless optimism that defined him finally cracked, he would seek me out. He would find me on the couch and, without a word, curl up beside me, sometimes resting his head in my lap, other times just pressing his back against my side, a silent request for contact, for ballast. And I would grant it. I would put aside my book or my laptop, and I would become still, a solid presence for him to lean against. We never spoke about it. The morning after the first time, I woke up on the couch alone, a blanket tucked around me, with a note from Liam on the coffee table saying he'd gone for an early swim. There was no mention of what had happened, no awkwardness. He was treating it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And so, I followed his lead. I treated it as natural, too. But internally, I was a wreck. Each time it happened, my mind would go into overdrive. It was a torturous dance of hope and fear. The simple, platonic explanation was always there, plausible and sensible. He was stressed and lonely, and I was his best friend, a safe source of comfort. It was a hug, just a longer, more horizontal version of one. But my heart, stubborn and foolish, insisted on reading more into it. It saw the way he sought me out specifically. It saw the way his breathing would deepen and even out when I ran my fingers through his hair. It saw the complete and total trust in the way he would fall asleep, completely vulnerable, in my arms. I felt like a scientist studying an unknown phenomenon, gathering data points, desperately trying to form a coherent theory. Was this friendship, in its deepest, most intimate form? Or was it the nascent stage of something else, something I had dreamed of for so long I could barely allow myself to name it? The ritual escalated a few weeks later. He had a particularly brutal week, culminating in a Friday where he had to fire someone from his team. He came home looking hollowed out, his face pale and drawn. He bypassed the couch entirely and found me in my bedroom, where I was archiving some old photos. He just stood in the doorway, looking lost. "Can't be alone tonight, Jules," he whispered, his voice rough. My head's too loud. The name, Jules, was something he only used when he was at his most unguarded. My breath caught in my throat. "Okay," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "The couch is all yours." He shook his head, a small, tired motion. "No, I mean, can I just stay in here?" My room was my sanctuary. It was where the quietest, most honest parts of me lived. The walls were covered in my photographs, black and white images of lonely streets and anonymous faces. It was a space that was entirely mine, and he was asking to enter it, not as a visitor, but as a resident for the night. The air crackled with unspoken meaning. My bed was a queen, big enough for 2 people, but the symbolic space it would take to share it felt immeasurable. "Yeah," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Yeah, of course." That night, we lay in my bed, side by side, a careful foot of space between us, both of us staring up at the ceiling. The silence was different from our usual comfortable quiet. This silence was heavy, filled with questions. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the soft sound of his every breath. I was hyper-aware of him, of the proximity of his limbs to mine, of the sheer fact of his presence in my most private space. I lay as still as a stone, terrified that any movement would break the fragile truce of the moment. After an eternity, he shifted, rolling onto his side to face me. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark slash of his eyelashes against his cheek. "Jules?" he whispered into the darkness. "Yeah." My voice was tight. "Thanks," and that was it. He rolled back over, his back to me, and within minutes, his breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. But I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. I was drowning in ambiguity. He was giving me all these signals, these moments of profound intimacy, but they were all wrapped in the plausible deniability of friendship and need. He was opening doors, but only a crack, never wide enough for me to be sure of what was on the other side. And I was too afraid to push them open myself, terrified I would find nothing there but an empty room and a broken friendship. It was a beautiful, exquisite torture. He was offering me everything I wanted, but in a form I couldn't be sure was real, like a dream you can't trust upon waking. I was living in a state of suspended disbelief, caught between the hope that this was everything and the fear that it was nothing at all. This new ritual, sharing my bed, became the norm on his worst nights. The initial, careful distance between us slowly eroded. It began with an accidental brush of hands, then a foot touching mine. One night, I woke up to find his arm thrown across my chest, his face buried in my shoulder. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, so close to his ear he must have felt it. I didn't move a muscle. I just lay there, breathing him in, the clean scent of his skin, the faint smell of chlorine that always clung to him. I committed the feeling to memory, the weight of him, the warmth, the soft puff of his breath against my neck. It was the most peaceful and the most terrifying moment of my life. When the sun began to rise, I carefully, painstakingly, slipped out from under his arm before he could wake up and find us like that. I couldn't bear the potential for awkwardness, the morning after analysis that might shatter the fragile, unspoken understanding we had built. I needed to protect the ambiguity, because the ambiguity was all I had. It was a delicate ecosystem, and I was terrified of disturbing it. The tension continued to build, a gathering of atmospheric pressure before a storm. The unspoken thing between us was becoming a physical presence in our apartment. It sat with us at the dinner table. It watched TV with us from the other end of the couch. It lay in the bed between us on the nights we shared it. I saw a change in him, too. It was no longer just about him seeking comfort when he was down. There were other moments, small and fleeting, that I collected like precious stones. The way his eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. A hand on my shoulder that stayed just a second too long. Once, I was cooking, and he came up behind me to get something from a cabinet, his chest pressing against my back for a brief, electric moment that left me breathless. He was orbiting me, his gravitational pull growing stronger, and I felt myself losing the ability to maintain a safe distance. My photography began to change. I had always kept my photos of him private, a secret collection for myself. But now, I found myself wanting to photograph him differently, not as an object of quiet worship, but as a participant in a dialogue. I asked if I could take his portrait, properly this time, with my professional equipment. He agreed, with that easy smile of his that always made my stomach flip. I set up a simple backdrop in our living room, just a plain gray canvas, and positioned the lights. I wanted to capture something of the turmoil and the tenderness I had seen in him over the past few months. As he sat on the stool, I looked at him through the viewfinder, the way I had 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. The camera was no longer a shield. It was a conduit. I could feel the energy flowing between us, the silent questions, the yearning. "Just look at me," I said, my voice softer than I intended. And he did. He looked directly into the lens, but it felt like he was looking past it, right into me. His expression was open, vulnerable, a landscape of emotions I had only ever glimpsed in the dark. There was exhaustion, yes, but there was also a deep, searching affection. There was confusion, and there was a profound loneliness that mirrored my own. In that moment, looking at him through my camera, I felt a terrifying certainty. He felt it, too. Whatever it was, he felt it. He just didn't have the words for it. Or maybe he was just as scared of them as I was. I took the picture. It was the most honest photograph I had ever taken. It was a portrait of two people standing on a precipice, terrified to fall, and terrified not to. The precipice, as it turned out, was the third-floor stairwell of our building. It happened a week after the portrait session. Things had been quiet between us, a tense, humming silence. The ritual had paused. He hadn't sought me out for comfort. Instead, he seemed to be actively avoiding me, keeping to his room, finding excuses to be out of the apartment. The space that had grown between us felt cold and vast, and the silence was no longer comfortable, but strained. I was descending into a spiral of anxiety, replaying every moment, every touch, convincing myself I had imagined it all, that I had projected my own feelings onto his simple need for friendship. I had built a beautiful, fragile house of cards, and now the slightest breeze of reality was threatening to bring it all down. That night, I had to get out. I went for a long walk, my camera in hand, but I didn't take a single photo. The world seemed flat and devoid of interest. My inner lens was broken. When I returned to our building, it was late, close to midnight. As I came through the front door, I saw him. He was on duty. I had almost forgotten that he'd picked up a few shifts as a night security guard for our building complex to make some extra money. It was an easy gig, mostly just sitting at a desk and buzzing people in. He looked different in the stark, unflattering light of the lobby, the cheap navy blue blazer of the uniform making his broad shoulders seem constrained. He was staring at the bank of security monitors, but his gaze was distant, unfocused. He looked up as I walked in, and his face was a mask of conflict. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. "Hey," I replied, my heart starting to pound. "Quiet night." Always, he stood up from the desk, his movements stiff. He was taller than me by a few inches, and he seemed to loom in the empty lobby. Walking back to the apartment? It was a strange question. Of course I was. "Yeah, just got back. I'll walk with you," he said. It wasn't a question. My breaks in 5 minutes. The elevator ride up to our floor was excruciating. The silence was thick and suffocating. He stood on his side. I stood on mine, both of us staring at the floor numbers as they lit up, as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. When the doors opened on our floor, I started to turn towards our apartment, but he put a hand on my arm, stopping me. His touch was firm, insistent. "Not this way," he said, his voice low and rough. "Come here." He led me away from our apartment, towards the fire exit at the end of the hall. He pushed the heavy metal door open, and a wave of cold, damp air washed over us. He pulled me into the stairwell and let the doors swing shut behind us with a heavy, echoing clang. The sound seemed to seal us in, cutting us off from the rest of the world. We were alone, suspended between floors, in a concrete box lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent tube that cast long, distorted shadows. He stood in front of me, blocking the door, his face half in shadow. I could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. He looked terrified. He looked like he was about to jump off a cliff. My own fear was a cold knot in my stomach. I thought he was going to end it. I thought he was going to say that things had gotten weird, that he needed space, that he was moving out. I braced myself for the impact, for the shattering of everything. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was hopelessly lost. Finally, he looked around the small, empty space, his eyes darting into the corners, as if looking for an escape. His gaze settled on the ceiling. "This stairwell has no cameras," he said. The words hung in the air, bizarre and ominous. I didn't understand. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he in some kind of trouble? Was he about to confess to a crime? It made no sense. "Okay," I said slowly, my voice cautious. "Why does that matter?" He finally met my eyes, and the raw, desperate need I saw there stole the air from my lungs. It was the same look he'd had in his eyes during the portrait session, but amplified, 100 times more intense. It was the look of a man who had run out of words, out of plausible deniability, out of room to hide. "It matters," he breathed, "because I can't do this in front of them." He gestured vaguely back towards the hallway, towards the world of security monitors and unseen observers. He took a step closer, and then another, until the space between us was gone. He put his hands on my shoulders, his grip tight, grounding. He was trembling. Or maybe I was. And then he pressed me back against the cold steel of the handrail. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a final, undeniable closing of the distance. The metal was cold and hard against my spine. His body was a wall of warmth in front of me. He caged me in, his hands sliding from my shoulders down my arms to grip my elbows. He wasn't being threatening. He was anchoring himself to me. He lowered his forehead to rest against mine, his eyes squeezed shut. I could feel his breath, warm and shaky, against my lips. "Jules," he whispered, his voice cracking on my name. I am so lost, my heart shattered and reformed in the space of a single second. This wasn't an ending. It was a confession. All the fear, all the anxiety drained out of me, replaced by a wave of tenderness so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I slowly, carefully, raised my hands and placed them on his chest, over his heart. It was beating as wildly as mine. "I know," I whispered back. "Me too." That seemed to be all the permission he needed. He tilted his head, a small, hesitant movement, and his lips brushed against mine. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was a question, asked in the softest language possible. I didn't pull away. I didn't even breathe. I just waited. He took that as his answer. He closed that final millimeter of distance, and he kissed me. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated confession. It was clumsy and desperate and heartbreakingly gentle. It tasted of loneliness and fear and 4 years of unspoken, unacknowledged yearning. It was everything I had ever wanted and everything I had been terrified of, all at once. It was the breaking of a dam, a flood of feeling so immense it felt like it could drown us both. I kissed him back, my hands clutching the front of his uniform blazer, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. We stayed like that for a long, timeless moment, in the cold, unobserved privacy of the stairwell, finally speaking the truth without a single word. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine again, his eyes still closed. I could feel the tremors running through his body. The silence that fell between us now was different. It wasn't empty or strained. It was full. It was the quiet after a storm, heavy and clean and charged with the scent of rain. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We can be lost together." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching my face, looking for confirmation, for reassurance. I gave him a small, shaky smile. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of profound relief, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his own face. It was like watching the sun rise after a long night. In the harsh, fluorescent light of that forgotten stairwell, he had never looked more beautiful. The aftermath was not as simple as a sunrise. In fact, it was more like the gray, uncertain dawn that follows a storm. The walk from the stairwell to our apartment door was silent, but charged with a new, fragile energy. We were holding a piece of delicate, hand-blown glass between us, terrified of dropping it. When we got inside, the familiar space of our living room felt alien, rearranged by the new knowledge that existed between us. He didn't follow me to my room. He didn't curl up on the couch. He just stood in the entryway for a moment, his face a canvas of confusion and exhaustion. "I should get back," he mumbled, not looking at me. "My break's over, Liam," I started, but he was already turning away. "I'll see you in the morning." He slipped out the door, closing it softly behind him, leaving me alone with the echoing silence and the ghost of his kiss on my lips. The next few days were a special kind of hell. It was a regression, a retreat into separate corners. Liam became a ghost in our apartment. He left for his swim before I woke up and came home late, after I was already in my room. When we did cross paths, in the kitchen or the hallway, he was painfully awkward. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His answers to my questions were clipped, monosyllabic. The easy, comfortable intimacy we had shared for years was gone, replaced by a chasm of excruciating silence. The door he had cracked open in the stairwell had been slammed shut, and I was left outside, freezing in the sudden cold. My mind, my greatest enemy, went to work. I dissected the kiss, the conversation, every single second of that night in the stairwell. I convinced myself I had misread everything. It wasn't a confession. It was a moment of weakness, a cry for help that I had selfishly misinterpreted as romantic. He was stressed, lonely, confused, and I had taken advantage of his vulnerability. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He regretted it. That was the only logical explanation for his behavior. He was disgusted, with me or with himself or both, and was now trying to figure out how to escape the mess he had created without completely destroying our friendship. The beautiful, fragile thing we had held between us was now just a pile of glittering shards on the floor, and I was the one who had dropped it by kissing him back, by admitting I was lost, too. After 3 days of this silent torture, I couldn't take it anymore. The ambiguity that I had once found so perversely comforting was now an active, corrosive poison. I needed to know. Even if the truth was the worst thing I could imagine, it had to be better than this suffocating uncertainty. I waited up for him. I sat on the couch in the dark, the same spot where he had first laid his head in my lap, and I waited. He came in well after 1 in the morning, moving quietly, trying not to wake me. I turned on the small lamp beside the couch, and he froze in the doorway, caught in the sudden pool of soft light. He looked like a deer in the headlights, ready to bolt. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quiet but firm. There was no room for negotiation in my tone. He sighed, a sound of pure, weary resignation. He dropped his bag and came to sit in the armchair opposite the couch, putting as much distance between us as the small room would allow. He hunched over, his elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. "Liam, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, he lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face etched with a misery that mirrored my own. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve. "What happened? You can be honest with me. If you regret what happened in the stairwell, just tell me. I can take it. But this silence, this avoidance, I can't. It's killing me." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Regret it? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Jules, no. God, no. I don't regret it. A small, fragile shoot of hope pushed its way through the compacted soil of my despair. Then what is it? Why are you pulling away? I thought we were on the same page. He finally broke. A dry, ragged sob escaped his lips, a sound of such profound anguish that it knocked the wind out of me. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. I don't know what page I'm on, he choked out, his words muffled by his palms. I don't know what book I'm even in. I feel like I'm going crazy. I moved from the couch to kneel on the floor in front of him, my earlier resolve melting away into pure, aching empathy. I gently pulled his hands away from his face. His cheeks were wet with tears. Talk to me, I urged, my voice soft. Please. Whatever it is, we can figure it out. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with confusion and fear. I've spent my whole life being one thing, he said, his voice raw. I like girls. I date girls. That's who I am. It's the blueprint. And it was fine. It was okay. But it was never this. He gestured vaguely between the two of us. It was never the way it is with you. The quiet. The feeling of coming home. I thought that was just friendship. The best friendship I've ever had. I told myself that's all it was. He took a shaky breath, gathering himself. But then, these past few months, everything at work, feeling so untethered. The only time I felt safe, the only time my head went quiet, was when I was with you. When I was literally leaning on you. And I started to need it. I started to crave it. And that scared the hell out of me. Because it didn't feel like just friendship anymore. And then I'd look at you, really look at you, when you were concentrating on your photos or just reading on the couch, and I'd feel this thing in my chest. This huge, terrifying, wonderful thing. And I had no name for it. He looked down at our hands. I hadn't even realized I was holding his. That night in the stairwell, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I saw you in the lobby, and it was like a magnet. I could not go to you. I couldn't have that conversation in front of the cameras, in front of the world. Because I didn't know what the conversation even was. All I knew was that I had to be close to you. And I had to know if I was imagining things. If kissing you would feel like a mistake, and did it? I whispered, my heart in my throat. He looked up, and his eyes were clear, the confusion momentarily burned away by a single, shining certainty. It felt like the first real thing I've done in my entire life, he said. And that's what's been destroying me for the past 3 days. Because if that's real, then my whole life, my whole idea of myself, has been wrong. Or not wrong, just incomplete. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to be this new person. I'm so scared of screwing it up. Of screwing us up. The catharsis of his confession washed over me, a wave of immense, cleansing relief. All my fears, all my insecurities, had been shadows, my own projections. The truth was so much more complex, so much more terrifying, and so much more beautiful. He wasn't pulling away from me. He was pulling away from a version of himself he no longer recognized. He wasn't afraid of what we were. He was afraid of what he was becoming. I squeezed his hands. You don't have to have it all figured out, I said, my voice filled with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. You don't have to become a new person overnight. You're still you. You're still Liam. The guy who leaves his wet towels on the floor and knows how to make me laugh when I'm stressed. That hasn't changed. This, I gestured between us again, this doesn't erase anything. It just adds a new layer. A new chapter. We can just be, right here, in this. And we can figure it out together. I leaned forward and gently kissed him. It was different from the stairwell kiss. There was no desperation, no frantic confession. This was a kiss of reassurance, of quiet promise. It was soft and slow, and it felt like a foundation being laid, stone by careful stone. He responded instantly, his lips molding to mine, a sigh of relief shuddering through his body. When we pulled away, the tension that had been strangling our apartment for days had finally, blessedly, broken. He looked at me, a real, genuine smile reaching his tired eyes. Okay, he whispered. Together. And just like that, we began. Not with a grand declaration or a clear road map, but with a simple, shared agreement to be lost in the same direction. We entered a new phase, a period of quiet, intentional discovery. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a delicate, burgeoning certainty. We started over, in a way, learning each other in this new light. The old, easy friendship was still there, the bedrock beneath everything. But now there were new currents running through it, deeper and warmer. The physical intimacy that had once been a source of anxiety for me and unconscious need for him became a deliberate language. A hand held while we watched a movie. An arm slung around my shoulder as we walked down the street. It was all new and tentative, each small gesture a question and an answer. The first time he reached for my hand in public, his fingers lacing through mine as we waited to cross a street, my heart did a little flip. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like a revolution. It was an acknowledgement, a statement to the world, or at least to ourselves, that this was real. The nights were the biggest change. There was no more pretext, no more plausible deniability. He didn't come to my room because his head was too loud. He came because he wanted to be with me. The foot of careful space between us in the bed disappeared. We slept curled together, my back pressed against his chest, his arm a heavy, comforting weight around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. In those long, quiet hours of the night, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so many years, a low hum beneath the surface of my life, was finally silent. I was no longer an observer of his life. I was a part of it, woven into the very fabric of his nights and his mornings. Lying there, with the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my back, I felt like a photograph finally coming into focus, the blurry edges sharpening into a clear, beautiful image. I was home. We talked. We had long, meandering conversations that lasted late into the night, untangling the knots of the past 4 years. He told me about the subtle, unconscious pull he'd always felt towards me, the way my calmness had always centered him, a feeling he'd never experienced with any of his girlfriends. He confessed that he'd been jealous, in a strange, unidentifiable way, whenever I'd mentioned going on a date, a feeling he had always dismissed as possessive friendship. I, in turn, told him about my secret archive of photographs, about the years of quiet, patient yearning. I showed them to him, the hundreds of images I had collected. He looked through them, his expression a mixture of awe and a kind of tender sadness for all the time we had lost to silence. "You always saw me," he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked at the portrait I had taken. Even when I didn't see myself, a new domesticity settled over us, as comfortable as an old sweater. It was in the small, mundane moments that I found the most profound joy. Making coffee for him in the morning, the way he liked it. The comfortable silence as we sat at the kitchen table, him reading the news on his tablet, me editing photos, our feet tangled together under the table. It was the simple, profound peace of sharing a space, a life, with someone who understood the parts of you that required no words. The apartment, which had once felt so full of unspoken tension, was now a sanctuary of quiet understanding. The door to my bedroom was no longer a threshold of ambiguity. It was just a door, and we were both on the same side of it. One rainy Sunday afternoon, months later, we were lying on the couch, tangled up together, watching an old movie. He was tracing patterns on my arm with his finger, his head resting on my chest. The steady drumming of the rain against the window was a soothing, rhythmic backdrop. It was a scene so similar to the night the ritual had begun, yet it was a world away. There was no desperation, no unspoken pain. There was only a deep, abiding peace. He shifted, tilting his head back to look at me, a soft, easy smile on his face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The stairwell," I said without hesitation. His smile widened. "Yeah? Good thoughts, I hope. The best," I confirmed. "It's just funny how a place like that, a non-place, really, just a concrete passage between 2 floors, can become everything." He pushed himself up on one elbow, his expression turning more serious, more thoughtful. "It wasn't the place, Jules. It could have been anywhere. It was just the end of the line. I had run out of excuses. I had run out of ways to not see what was right in front of me. what you had been. All along, he leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of contentment and certainty. The stairwell just happened to be where I finally stopped running, and I suppose that's the truth of it. We build our lives in the rooms we are given, the dorm rooms, the offices, the bedrooms. We live according to the blueprints we've been handed, the identities we've constructed for ourselves. But sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find ourselves in an unexpected, unscripted space, a place with no cameras to observe us, no expectations to confine us. And in that quiet, interstitial moment, we are given a choice: to continue on our prescribed path, or to stop, to turn, and to finally face the person who has been walking beside us all along. We are given the chance to admit that we are lost, and in doing so, to finally be found. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together, not in spite of the quiet, but because of it. We had found our language, and it needed no translation. It was the simple, profound grammar of being home.